Wherever you like.
Cheers, thank you.
Are we ready to start? Yes, we are. Thank you very much, everybody. Now, pay attention, please. No conferring. Too much. That's it. Right, the show's on. This is it. Started. Thank you for being here, everybody. Are you going to open Noisy Sweets?
Oh, sorry. No.
Do it now. Do it now and pass them around. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel rather like the man in the old joke who, when he was about to be hanged, and he's standing there on the scaffold with a rope around his neck, and they say to him, just before they say, before we launch you into eternity, do you have any last words? And he says, yes. Are you sure this thing's safe? That's a bit how I feel this afternoon with this rather unusual show on a strange subject. And just actually to get us in the mood, and to get me in the mood as well, I'm going to sing you a song, the song that led me to the story of the Cato Street plot about 4 or 5 years ago when I first heard it. And without any further ado, let's sing this song in your own time. 1840 was a long time ago, that's why we're waiting. So. You're right. Is it working?
We're having the spinning wheel of death.
Oh, we've got the Wheel of Death. Oh, how appropriate for this show. Well, just to say that this song was introduced in 1840 at a place called the Cider Cellars on Maiden Lane, which is just off the Strand, in what was the precursor, really, of the music halls. Before the music hall, they had sort of gentlemen's drinking clubs, literally underground, and a huge, great room full of people getting booze and eating chops, and occasionally somebody would get up and do a turn. Are you ready?
Really sorry.
Wheel of Death, or we might have to do the a cappella version of this song. And, just shout when you're ready.
Okay, will do. Sorry.
All right, and when I first heard this song, as I say, about 4 or 5 years ago, and it intrigued me because, as you'll hear, this song really traces the old route that men and women were taken to be executed back in the day from Newgate Prison, or now the Old Bailey, of course, as you see when you see it on the news, the Central Criminal Court. And they would take them in a cart up past St. Sepulchre's Church, which is still there. The church from Oranges and Lemons. Oranges, you know, and when will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey. That's that one. It's still there, the same building that were the last of the buildings that witnessed all these events. And they would take them up to past St. Giles, where they be allowed to stop and have a little drink. Then up Oxford Street, past the Virgin Megastore. See, it's already history, this show, isn't it? And past Selfridges, Marks and Spencer's, all the way up to Marble Arch, or Tyburn, as it was then called, where hundreds of people were executed over 200 or 300 years. How are you doing?
We're restarting.
Oh, we're restarting. Okay. Right. So, well, I tell you, just give, as I say, give us a shout. And it was this song. We'll throw the song in anyway. It doesn't matter. This is the day we're videoing the show. How appropriate. Oh, our audiences love it when things go wrong. Don't they? So they take them up to Tyburn. And was that that first interested me in this whole subject. How many of you know about the Cato Street plot? Anyone know anything about it at all? Well, it's all right. It's all right to show your ignorance.
Was it called the conspiracy?
A plot was, yes, the Cato Street conspiracy, same sort of thing. Do you know anything about it? That's all you know. Okay. Well, it was, yes, a plot, a conspiracy or plot to assassinate the entire government of Lord Liverpool by beheading them and taking their heads in sacks up to the Mansion House in the city and declaring a people's government in waiting. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, that sounds like a good idea, isn't it? It's the easiest show in the world to flyer. when I give my flyers out in the courtyard, I just say, yeah, a plot to assassinate the government. Nice little old ladies go, oh, that's a good idea. There's something in the air, isn't it, at the moment? Have you noticed? Have you noticed that the world has changed in the last 4 or 5 years since I first started researching this show, really? And that was really what made me want to do it. Now, the Cater Street plot. How are you doing up there?
We're doing something.
This is me. Well, it's great. It's a wonderful song when it finally does. You'll love it. You're going to love it.
Shout with
All right, just give it a shout. I'll just continue with the show. So the Cater Street plot. Now, why people you see very angry back then? Why were people so angry in 1820? I mean, maybe. Well, I'll tell you. It was because really, first of all, principally Peterloo. The Peterloo Massacre. Now, again, how many of you have heard of that? Anybody know about it? But a few of you have. A few historians down here, okay? Because most people don't know anything about it. The 200th anniversary of it is coming up on the 16th of August, very soon. And it was a hot, blazing hot August day in Manchester. And hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people, in fact, between, I think, 60 to 80,000 people had arrived in Manchester on foot from all the surrounding mill towns and textile workers in their Sunday best, families, men, women and children. They poured into St. Peter's Fields, or St. Peter's Square as it is now in Manchester, to hear a man called Henry Hunt giving a speech about universal suffrage, the vote. You know, people they still felt that they would be happier if they had the vote. We know better now, don't we? But they do. But no, seriously, they were suffering. A lot of people were really, having a difficult time. There was the Corn Laws. I don't know if you remember the Corn Laws from your A-level history and all that. And I wish I'd paid more attention at school now because I have to research it all again. But the Corn Laws, a tariff, and put onto grain, wheat, and all that. All those things in order to really to benefit the merchants. But the people themselves were starving. They couldn't afford bread and beer, all the important things of life. And so they were suffering. They'd had a big war not so long before, the Napoleonic Wars, which had ended. All these soldiers were pouring back into the country with no money. Of course, people who are like same old story, happy to send them off, but nobody wants to see them when they come back injured. So there were people begging in the streets everywhere. There was no kind of support system whatsoever. If you lost your work, your families literally were starving in the street. Nobody had shoes or anything. And they were all the mill workers, you see, they had this terrible problem that they might have work, they might be able and ready to work, but there was no security. And that it was entirely up to the whim of the factory owner, whether they actually got to work that day. So what do we call that now? 0 hours contracts.
We're ready.
Yes, we've come a long way in 200 years, haven't we? Oh, we're ready?
Yep.
Okay, remember that. 0 hours contracts, bookmark that, we're going now to... Here we go, hit it. You're gonna love it. Oh, my name it is Sam All, chimney sweep, chimney sweep. My name it is Sam All, chimney sweep. Lights. Oh, me name it is Sam All, you're a bunch of muckers all, and me neck shall pay for all. When I die, me neck shall pay for all. When I die. Oh, I killed a man, 'tis said, so 'tis said, so 'tis said. I killed a man, 'tis said, so 'tis said. Yeah, I killed a man, 'tis said, with a great big piece of lead, and left him there for dead. Damn his eyes! Damn his eyes! I left him there for dead. Damn his eyes! I went up High Holborn Hill in a cart, in a cart. I went up High Holborn Hill in a cart. I went up High Holborn Hill, and at St. Giles took my gill, and at Tyburn made my will. Damn my eyes, damn my eyes. Tyburn made my will. Damn my eyes. Up the ladder I did grope, very slow, Up the ladder I did grope, very slow. Up the ladder I did grope, and they tied me with a rope, and not a word I spoke. Coming down, not a word I spoke. Isn't that a lovely song? It's Charlie's song, isn't it? I love it. I adore that song. As I say, it was that song that led me to the Cato Street plot. Now, all these people in Manchester were starving, they were having a terrible time, 0 hours contracts, they had no work, they had no security, they had no vote, they had nothing, and they were all poured in to hear this man, Henry Hunt, giving a speech about this. And so the local magistrates panicked. They'd never seen so many people, except in execution, probably. And so they read the Riot Act. Somebody stood on a balcony and said, "You'll disperse this place," and nobody heard them. Of course, they were all having such a good time. They were having a lovely day. And so there's Henry Hunt on the this podium, you see, and he sees in the distance these men on horseback starting to make their way through the crowd to arrest him. And these were the local Manchester yeomanry. They were the businessmen, the shop owners, cheesemongers, that kind of thing. And they were the middle class, and they hated these starving people, these workers demanding their rights. They hated them. Think Daily Mail readers on horseback with sabres. And they started coming through the crowd, and of course people started to panic. There was a child was knocked to the ground and trampled. People started screaming, and then they started just hacking them, just cutting at them with their swords, stabbing them, and there was mayhem. Within 10 minutes the whole place was in uproar. And so all the troops that the government had surrounded the Petersfields with, all were sent in. The Duke of Wellington's heroes of Waterloo on horseback, with their medals gleaming in the sun, went in there and they slaughtered. About 18 people were killed with sabres, and hundreds of people injured. And they, as I say, they cleared the square in about 10 minutes, but it left a very nasty stink in the country. People were angry about it, and they didn't know what to do, how they could get their revenge. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, wrote a poem, The Mask of Anarchy, which ends with the lines, "Rise like lions out of slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few." Okay. And so there was uproar. People were really, really angry about this. And one man who was really angry in London was a man called George Edwards. Remember that name, girls? Remember the name? George Edwards. He was furious about it. Now, George Edwards was a man who had been very, very poor. He'd been walking shoeless through the streets of London. But then he suddenly came into money. His uncle, who was a German baron, suddenly died and left him an entire fortune. So suddenly George Edwards had all this money to put into action his great plan of insurrection, the people's revolution, to assassinate the whole government. And he was going from pub to pub in the round about the Strand area of London, and he would go around saying, "The time has come to end all this humbugging. We need to take action. I have got a grand secret. The government is to be upset tonight, and I need a few good men like you, who I can rely on. You've heard about the bloody transactions in London, in Manchester, haven't you?" "Oh yeah, I have, yeah. Terrible what they did up there." "Yeah, well, here's a gun. There, go on, that'll show them. That'll blow their brains out with them. Go on, take it. You're Irish, right? Yeah, Irish. What about the Duke of Wellington? Wouldn't you like to have his head on a spike for what he's done to your country?" "Ah, yes, Duke of Wellington is a big rogue, so he is." "Well, here's a jerk. Go on, take it. You can take his head off with that. Now, you can go down to Parliament, you see, with books. You can take books into Parliament, and I've got grenades. I know how to make them. I know, you get a little cylinder, and you put tarred rope round it, and you fill it with gunpowder. I've got loads of the stuff. And then you take a bit of phosphorus in, and a bit of rope, and you light it, and then we throw it when some great business is going forward. Oh! What bloody distraction it'll make!" And he was trying to gather as many men as he could together to join, make this little private army. And one of the men he particularly wanted to meet was a man called Arthur Thistlewood. Now, I first heard the name Arthur Thistlewood when I read a piece. It was actually the song Sam Hall that led me to it, because I googled executions 1840. That's when the song was written. And that was so when this piece came up, written by William Makepeace Thackeray, who wrote Vanity Fair. And in it he describes this, it's a piece called Going to See a Man Hanged. And it's a vivid eyewitness account of exactly that. He wanted to go and see what happened at Newgate when somebody was hanged. What was the crowd like? How did they behave? And this piece, if you can find it online, Going to See a Man Hanged, is a vivid account of exactly that. And but he says it was something that arrested my attention. He talked about an execution that had happened 20 years earlier in the same place, outside Newgate, of Thistlewood. That was the name, Thistlewood. When Thistlewood and his companions had their heads taken off, which amazed me. For a start, the idea they were beheading people in 1820 outside Newgate. But then he also talks about something very strange that happened in the crowd that day in 1820. An unusual reaction. So that was what first got me, as I say, interested in the whole Cato Street plot. Now, Arthur Thistlewood was a man, he was about 50 years old, he was an old soldier, he had been very rich and he'd lost all his money and he was angry. He was in the drawings of him, you see, which were all done in court, while they were sitting listening to the evidence being laid against him. He looked like this. And he never changed his expression, apparently. Always had that look on his face. And he wanted to kill the guy. He was angry and he hated them. He was actually had challenged the Home Secretary, Lord Sidmouth, to a duel and ended up in prison for it. And when he came out, George Edwards was waiting for him. He wanted to meet Arthur Thistlewood, this wonderful man. And together, they started to hatch a plot to kill the bastards. And they gathered other men together, including, there was a man called Richard Tidd, who in the drawings looked like this. A little fat man, about 45, bald-headed, and he had a wife and a little girl. And 45, and he'd never been in trouble, but he started going to these radical meetings that George Edwards was having. There's always lots of gin going round, you see, because George Edwards could not only afford to pay for gunpowder, blunderbusses, sabres, all these weapons, but he also could provide food and drink. Alcohol. Very important if you want to start a revolution, get them drunk. Really helps. So he would come home drunk every night, which his wife hated. That was Richard Tidd. There was a man called William Davidson, who was what they called then a man of colour. He was actually a mixed race. He was the son of the Attorney General of Jamaica, who had had a liaison with the local women, and they brought up this very, very handsome young man in the picture. He's a very nice, good-looking young man in the pictures. And they brought him up, and he'd been sent to be educated in Edinburgh, of all places, in 1800. And also spent time in Aberdeen, and then came down to Liverpool, and then to London, where he lost all his money, and he had a wife and 4 children, and he fell in with the radicals and met George Edwards, and so became part of this gang. Then you had the other one was Brunt, a man called Thomas Brunt, who was born on Oxford Street, and it looks like this in the pictures. He's the only one in the pictures who's looking directly at the court artist. And he was a very surly, brutish man, Thomas Brunt. And then the last one, the one who really interests me actually, is a man called James Eames. He was about 34 years old. He was a loving family man. He had lovely children and a wife that he adored, 3 girls and a boy. And they were from Portsmouth. And he brought his family up to London from Portsmouth in order to try and make a living in London. And he'd opened a butcher shop in Hammersmith, which had failed. He then moved to Whitechapel and opened a coffee shop, where he also sold political pamphlets, quite trendy nowadays actually. But that had failed as well. So the poor man, he had to actually sell his last possession, his watch, in order to send his family back to Portsmouth so that they wouldn't end up dying and starving on the streets of London. And he met George Edwards, and George Edwards gave him food, gave him state dinners, and paid rent for his room, and really, really helped him, you see. And so he fell in with this group and became, as it were, radicalized, as we say now. So there were all these men, and they were plotting how they were going to kill the guy. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? And they thought, well, it'd be great to get them all together at one time in some room where they're all together in a meeting or something. And but they couldn't find out. They were always scanning the papers every day, trying to find out, are they going to be having dinner somewhere or whatever. And they almost gave up. They had these meetings once, twice a week, sometimes twice a day, trying to plot these raids. And they were always about to give up when suddenly on the 22nd of February, 1820, George Edwards came running in with a copy of the New Times. And there was an advert, tiny, we had to look hard to find it, but there it is. It says, Earl of Harrowby to have a grand cabinet dinner at his house in Grosvenor Square tomorrow night. Tomorrow night! This is it! This is it! Brunt went to the window and he looked out and apparently he said, damn my eyes if I don't believe there was a God. How many times have I prayed for him to bring these bastard vermin together so that they might be destroyed together? He has answered my prayers. And they started to make their plans. Thistlewood wrote out a proclamation saying, your tyrants are destroyed. The friends of liberty are desired to come forward to support the provisional government which is now sitting. And they hired a little stable block to make as their base of operations on Cato Street. Now, Cato Street is a little street just off Edgware Road. And it's still there. If you're walking down Edgware Road and you see Crawford Street, you walk down it, you see a little archway, and you just walk through, and there, that little dilapidated stable building is still there. It's now a little posh mews house. But in those days it was, as I say, a little building with, in the lower half there was 2 empty stalls for cattle, and then there was a ladder going straight up and a hatch in the floor of the loft above. So you go straight up into this loft. And it was a very bare room, everything wooden of course. And there was a table laid out here, a sort of trestle table, on which all the gunpowder and the handmade grenades that George Edwards had provided and made, and weapons, and a big chunk of cheese and bread. Now, before all these other men arrived, these people who'd heard there was going to be food here, Thistlewood made his plan. And he said, listen, this is what we're going to do. We go down to Grosvenor Square, and we hide in the trees. And when they've all gone in, we go and knock on the door. And when the door is answered, we go in, we present arms, and we shoot anyone who makes a noise. We demand to know where the ministers are dining. And then we go in and murder a lot of them. And if there be any good men there, we kill them too for keeping bad company. And so that was the plan, you see, and they're all ready to go in. Ings was really excited. He said, I want to be the first one to go in. I want to be, I'll go in, I shall say, my lords, I have men here as good as the Manchester Yeomanry. Enter, citizens, and do your duty! Aha, Castlereagh, you bastard! There's he dead, throw it in the sack. Ah, the Prime Minister, Lord Liverpool. There we go. There, into the sack with him. Oh, and then I'll see Wellington. Hello, Wellington, you bastard. Take his head off. And they were all there in the room. On that night, there were about 35 men crammed into the space, about the size of the stage. 35 men, most of them there, as I say, just to eat, just because they was hungry. And most of them didn't even know what these weapons were for. But they never had a chance to find out, because suddenly, about 7:45 that evening, they suddenly heard a shout from down below. Hello there! Hold the light! And up the ladder came a Bow Street runner. Smithers and his companion, Ruthven, came and stood behind him. He said, ah, well, here we have a pretty nest of it. I have a warrant to apprehend all of you, and I hope that you will come peacefully. At which point, Thistlewood grabbed a sabre that was on the table, went towards him and went right through his body. And Smithers, with the words, oh God, I am done! Which I don't think people say that kind of thing nowadays when they get assassinated. But he said, oh God, I am done! And he fell backwards into the arms of his colleagues and died on the spot. So it was immediately a capital offence. And somebody blew out the candles, and they was plunged into darkness, and there was mayhem. All the men scrambled out of that place as quickly as they could. And Thistlewood went down the ladder, kicking anybody out of the way, ran off down the street, where luckily he ran into George Edwards, who wasn't present when the raid actually happened, but who took him to a safe house in an obscure street in London, where unfortunately he was discovered very shortly afterwards, in bed, Thistlewood, still dressed with his clothes that he'd been wearing in the raid. And he came very quietly, didn't make any kind of attempt to escape, just the same expression, almost as if he'd been expecting it, and was taken with the others who were captured to the Tower of London, including William Davidson, the one who was the man of colour, as they say, who was downstairs with a blunderbuss, keeping guard at the bottom of the ladder. And when he was wrestled to the ground, some of his Scottish education must have rubbed off on him, because what do you think he sang? Scots were he with Wallace bled, Scots when Bruce of oft time led, welcome to your gory bed, or to victory. Everybody, Scottish. Now's the day and now's the hour. Let's hear it. Now the front of battle hour, see approach proud Boris Edward's power, chains and slavery. Yes, so anyway, he was definitely guilty. Anyway, he was captured. They were taken, 10 of them, to the Tower of London. And they were, of course, charged with high treason. Now, 5 of them were smart. They did a little plea bargain with the government, and they pleaded guilty, and so they were transported to Australia, which was a very good move, because 2 of them became chief of police. Became the scourge of the local bushwhackers. Actually, I must Google bushwhacker. I still don't know what that is. What's a bushwhacker? Anyway, and they also another one became a master baker in the town where he lived, so they did very well out of it. But the other 5, Thistlewood, Tidd, Brunt, Ings, and Davidson, faced the full wrath of the law. And on the day they were sentenced, the sentence was read out on the Friday. The whole court was packed. Complete silence. All you could hear was the sound of the chains as the men shuffled into the dock. And they were given a chance to say why they should not face the full force of the law. And then the sentence was read out. I have now to pronounce upon you the sentence of the law, which is that you, and each of you, be taken from hence to the jail from which you came, and thence that you be drawn upon a hurdle to the place of execution, and there be hanged by the neck until you be dead, and that afterwards your heads shall be severed from your bodies, and your bodies be divided into 4 quarters to be disposed of as His Majesty shall think fit. And may God, in His infinite goodness, have mercy upon your souls. Now, they didn't actually hang, draw and quarter them in the end, because I think they realised that you can't do that in modern... But in 1820 London, you can't drag people on hurdles through the street. But that was actually a more compassionate version of hang, drawing and quartering from the previous version, which was you will be hanged by the neck until you are almost dead. Then you will be cut down, and your genitals will be cut off. If you're a woman, your breasts will be removed. You'll be then thrown into the fire. Your stomach will be opened. Your entrails will be pulled out and shown to your face. And then you will be cut up without anaesthetic into 4 pieces to be disposed of at the mercy of as the king shall think fit, which must be a horrible job for the king. So what are we going to do with them this time? You know, where are we going to send them? Frome, send a bit to Frome, maybe. A little bit to Crianlarich, they never get anything there. And, you know, but there were 5 of them this time, all those quarters they'd have to deal with, so they obviously decided not to bother with it. But I just can't think how it is that in a Christian country, they could have ended up doing this kind of thing. Did they not read the words of the great man himself? Did they not realise if you go to any church anywhere in the world, what you see but a graphic depiction of a public execution? A horrible, terrible kind of public execution as well, to be crucified, which they still do in at least one country that's a very good ally of ours. And the whole Easter story, it's not about bunnies and little chicks and stuffing yourself with as much chocolate as you can. It's about a graphic depiction of torture and crucifixion of a man. That's what it's all built around. How did they not realise that this was supposed to be saying this is the worst of humanity? On my father's side, you see, when I was at school, I couldn't understand why we had to say prayers to God and Jesus, because my dad said there was no such thing as God. So I thought, well, why are all my friends being told this whopping great lie? And why are they all believing it? See, I was the one who knew that it was all a lie, you see. So I've been allergic to it ever since. But I thought, well, let's have a look. I read when I was doing my research for the show, I got a Bible. I actually got a King James Bible. And I thought, let's see what the man himself, what Christians are supposed to believe. Now, one of the men, when he was giving his speech why he shouldn't face the force of the law, William Davidson, quoted the Old Testament, Deuteronomy. Chapter 19, verse 21, and thine eyes shall not pity, but life shall go for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. And he expected to get mercy. He should have gone to the man himself, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew, his greatest hits. where he laid it all out. And he says, let me see, Matthew 5:38. You may have heard that it hath been said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, but I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. And whoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to them the other also. You have heard it said, that you shall love your neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemy. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pity, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you. Chapter 7, judge not, that ye be not judged. And then his greatest hit of all, 7:12. And whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, do as ye even so to them. Do as you would be done by. Treat people as you would wish. What Christian civilization were you not listening to this? You didn't read your own book. You didn't see what your own man was saying. Honestly, I don't know. The reason is I don't think it's impossible. You can't do those things. It's too much. It's too hard. Human beings are hardwired to be angry and vengeful. And they can't do it, so that's why he ended up on the cross, poor man. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, so don't get me started, please. Thank you very much, Christian civilization. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, shut up. Anyway, so there they were, these poor men. They'd had this horrible sentence, and then the next part of their punishment, as it were, as we have from the official account of 1820, the heart-rending scenes of introducing the families of the wretched man to take a last farewell of their families was gone through. The scenes exhibited in the cells were of the most agonizing description. The unfortunate children, capable of understanding the situation of their unhappy parents, were convulsed with sorrow. The strongest feelings of commiseration were excited in the minds of those whose painful duty it was to be present. And then they wrote letters. Once the families are gone, they sat down and wrote letters to them. This is on the Sunday night. They were getting up the next morning to be for an appointment that they had no chance to. Don't you think it's awful? Because all of us know we're going to go one day, don't we? Even you, look, you're young. You think it'll never happen, but it's coming one day. We've got a big question mark over our heads, and none of us know when it's coming, but we know it is. And imagine going to bed at night knowing that 8 o'clock next morning you're going to face eternity. I just don't know how people can deal with that. And poor James Ings, he sat down and wrote to his wife, "My dear Celia, I hardly know how to begin or what to say, for the laws of tyrants have parted us forever." He goes on, he says, "P.S. Give my love to my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and Aunt Mary. I am gone out of a very troublesome world, and I hope that you will let it pass like a summer cloud over the earth." Then to his daughters, "My dear daughters, my dear little girls," writes a letter that ends, "Farewell, farewell, my dear children, your unfortunate father." And then his last letter, written at 8 o'clock that night, "My little dear boy. My dear boy, I hope you will make a bright man in society. Be honest, sober, industrious, and upright, and do unto all men as they should do unto you. Be careful of every shrewd, designing, flattering tongue. My dear boy, be a good, kind, obedient child to your poor mother, and comfort her, and be a loving brother to your sister, your loving and unfortunate father, James Ings." And then they went to sleep, and something happened to him overnight. Because in the morning, you see, about 7:30, this procession of under-sheriffs and officials and the governor arrived at the condemned men's cells, and they were let out one at a time into a yard out the back, with a high wall all the way around it, and a little bench just there, to have their irons knocked off. And the first one who came down the steps was Arthur Thistlewood. All he said was, "It seems like a fine day." Put his foot there, they knocked his irons off, went and sat down, and he was pinioned as well. They put a sort of band around your middle, so you just moved your arms like that. And they all had oranges, they were given oranges, on which they were sucking hungrily. They went and sat down. Next one who came out was William Tidd. You remember little William Tidd? And he came running down the steps, full of enthusiasm apparently, and he put his foot down and he actually helped the man knock it off. And then he went over with these oranges in his hand. "Good morning, Mr. Thistlewood. How are you today?" I have never felt better. Next one came down the steps was William Davidson, the man of colour. Now he had had a complete religious conversion overnight because they're all deists. These men, they believed in a god, but not the Christian God. And but he overnight had had this conversion, and he requested the presence of the Reverend Cotton, who was resident at Newgate. And Reverend Cotton stayed with him the whole time thereafter. He didn't talk to the others, he just talked with them, and they prayed and prayed. I am the life of the Next was Brunt. Ow! That hurt. When he sat down, sucked on his orange, and the last one who came down the steps was Ings. And it says here, in the official account, he danced as he came down the steps along the yard. He had all the appearance of a man in a violently disturbed and feverish state of mind. His eyes, which were dark, glistened and rolled incessantly, and he spoke in occasional incoherent half-sentences of tyrants, starvation, and his family, and kept singing over and over again a song, the refrain of a famous song of the day, which goes, "Oh, give me death or liberty." Everybody know that song? Of course, you won't know, it's completely forgotten, that's why. But it's called "Oh, Give Me Death or Liberty." And he was screaming it at the top of his voice, disturbing everybody. But he went and sat down, and eventually the procession was picked up, and at about 7:45, they were all taken through the dark corridors of Newgate, and Ings screaming, "Oh, give me death and liberty," at the top of his voice. And eventually they got to the lodge, which is just outside, just above the debtor's gate, which is now, if you go and look at the prison, where the public's now go in and out, where you see it on the news sometime. And if you actually go and stand and look up, half close your eyes, you can see the actual space where all this happened, where the scaffold was built. It was a huge scaffold, because there were 5 men, and it was, again, about this size, and there was a beam of wood here, you see the actual scaffold itself, and a trapdoor, and laid out here 5 open coffins, ready to receive them. Isn't that a nice touch? And so they were led through to the back there, Ings screaming, and eventually the first one to be called up was Arthur Thistlewood. Some steps here, so he goes up the steps onto the scaffold in front of a vast crowd of people, thousands of people there. Oh, everywhere, I mean, on roofs and clinging onto drain pipes and at every window. And he apparently said, "I have but a few moments to live, and I hope that you will know that I have been sincere in my endeavours and die a friend to liberty." Went over, stood, and they put the noose around his neck and he waited. Then the next one to be called was William Tidd. Ings cried out, "Ho-ho! Goodbye, give me my hand, my friend!" Tidd said, "My wife and... Come on, my old cock of wax! Don't get your spirits down, it'll all be over soon." Tidd goes up the ladder onto the scaffold and tripped. And to steady himself, he did a little dance. And the crowd gave him 3 cheers. They loved him, he was a smash hit. And he went over and he bowed up there, you see, to the church, St. Sepulchre's up there. And he bowed to the audience here, you see. And he came down here and bowed to them. And then he went and stood and had the noose put round his neck ready, and he asked that the noose, the knot, be put on the right side, you see, because that actually breaks the neck and makes it very quick. If you have it up there, it just chokes you. He asked for a useful tip. You never know, do you? Useful one there. And so he was waiting, you see, and then the next one up the ladder was William Davidson. He comes with the Reverend Cotton praying with him all the time. He's around his neck. Then up the ladder, Brunt. Saw all the soldiers down below, and he said, "I see nothing but a military government will do for this country, unless for the others as brave as us." So put the noose around his neck, and his last act was to reach into his pocket and take a big pinch of snuff. And then the last one up was Ings, and he roared onto the scaffold and went, "Hey! Hey! Hey!" But nobody took it up. The crowd didn't respond, they were silent. You see, he missed the golden rule of show business, isn't it, Jeff? You have to earn it. You see, they loved Ted. They thought he was wonderful. They didn't like Ince. He freaked them out because he was so angry and deranged about it. And he was screaming this, give me death or liberty, give me death or liberty. Now, I'm going to stop just here because I want to talk about this give me death or liberty. As I say, when I first read the account, that was actually, I think, the thing that interested me the most. This song that everybody knew then. It's referred to in the official accounts as that well-known radical song, or that famous song, that song we all know, Give Me Death or Liberty, but everyone's forgotten it now. I thought, I can't really do the show unless I know what the notes were under those words, because that's important. I could make something up, but it wouldn't be authentic. I thought, I want to find it so that I can really suggest what it must have sounded like to that crowd when he was screaming it on the scaffold. So I did a research. I Googled, oh, give me death or liberty, and what comes up if you Google that is a speech by Patrick Henry. Anyone heard of him? Yes, are you American? Well, there you are, that's why, because you're, where from? Brooklyn, New York. See, only Americans know this speech. No British people have ever heard it, but it's kind of drilled into you, isn't it? Give me death or liberty. It's we shall fight them on the beaches is one of those famous speeches.
The reverse it. They say, give me liberty.
Give me a liberty. Very good. You're very, yes.
You're listening.
He's listening, he's paying attention. Give me liberty or give me death. But it's the same thing, it comes from the same source. So anyway, listen, do you want to do the show? It's all right, sir. Thank you for your contribution. You're right. No, you're right. Absolutely, give me liberty or give. Now, this was a speech delivered to the Second Virginia Convention, am I right? In Richmond, Virginia. So, yes, it is March. Thank you, Clef Clogs. March 1775, in which he made this speech to the convention trying to persuade them that they should commit their forces to the Revolutionary War against King George III and us, the British. And so he made this speech which ends with this thunderous final paragraph where he says, "Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so sweet, and peace so dear as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death!" Bang! That was the shot. That was what started the whole thing going. It was an instant hit. Everybody loved that speech. But you know what? I've discovered he nicked it. He stole it. He stole that phrase from somebody else, from a play that was written in 1712 by Joseph Addison, that was very popular years later with American revolutionaries. And actually, George Washington staged this play at Valley Forge in 1777 to encourage his troops. And it's a play about a famous Roman senator whose name became a byword for moral incorruptibility and stoicism. Now, this senator had broken away from Caesar and started an insurgency in Tunisia. And Caesar tried everything he could to win him back over, to bribe him, to threaten him, and this senator was absolutely unshakable. And in the play, which I don't think has been probably performed for about 200 years, the end of Act 2, Scene 1, there's this famous speech where he stood there, the senator, with his loyal henchman, his co-fighter, Juba. And Juba wants to marry his daughter, you see, Marcia, and he wants Marcia. Lovely name, isn't it? And he's talking to him about that, and you see, the Roman senator won't have it. He says, "Adieu, young prince. I would not hear a word should diminish thee in my esteem. Remember, the hand of fate is over us, and heaven exacts severity from all our thoughts. It is not now a time to talk of aught but chains and conquest, liberty or death!" Blackout sensation. I loved it. Now, who was this Roman senator? I wonder if anybody knows. You see, I think this is an exclusive. Nobody else seems to have picked this up, but I have. Do you know who it was? Marcus Porcius Cato Uticensis. Cato! By sheer coincidence. Cato, the man who gave his name to the street, which gave his name to the plot, which ended up, and his famous catchphrase, liberty or death, ended up in this song, liberty or death, death or liberty. that was screened by James Ings from the scaffold. Now, it's only a coincidence, I'm not saying there's anything in it, but if I was a conspiracy theorist, which I am, I would send that straight to David Icke and let him figure it out. But anyway, but the actual song itself, I actually found it in the British Library, buried in the library, and I had it orchestrated. I'm going to sing it for you, and in fact, I'm going to teach it to you, and I want you to leave here singing that song, because it's a wonderful piece of music. And it was in a little play, an interlude. In those days, a big theatre, Royal Drury Lane. And in those days, if you had a big production, like in this case, Electra, they'd have a little interlude in the middle. And it was a little musical comedy, about 20 minutes long, nothing to do with the main show. And in this case, it was a show called The Election. And it starred a man called Charles Bannister, who was an enormously popular singer, comedian of his day. And in fact, he was a famous wit. He was about to take a drink of brandy, and a friend of his was a physician, said, "Stop! Don't drink that evil stuff! Don't you realize that brandy is our enemy?" And he said, "Yes, and do not the scriptures tell us to love our enemies?" Of course, he had to be there. But that was Charles Bannister, and he plays Honest John the baker, who's going to vote in the upcoming election, you see. He must have been a property owner because he could vote. And his wife is nagging him to vote for Sir Courtly, the aristocratic candidate, you see. And he wants to vote for Squire Trusty, the man of the people. She says, "Sir Courtly says if you only vote for him, he'll fill our pockets to the very brim. I tell him all, this canting will not do. I'll sell my loaves, but not my conscience too. Shall I be to get a guinea for a penny roll?" That's it. Here's the song. Listen. Whilst happy in my native land, I boast my country's charter. I'll never basely lend my hand her liberties to barter. The noble mind is not at all by poverty degraded. 'Tis guilt alone can make us fall, and well I am persuaded that every Briton's song should be, "Oh, give me death or liberty, oh, 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 give me death or liberty." The song was an instant sensation, became a classic, everybody immediately knew it. And that was 1774, 6 months before Patrick Henry made his speech, thank you very much. So he got there first. Now, 20 years later, you see the song morphed, and it turned into something else, because there's a book also in the British Library of radical songs. Songs that were sung at radical meetings with flaming torches by angry people who wanted to kill the government. And it's all old tunes with new words. And there's a new version of Death or Liberty, which, by the way, has a classical reference in it. The Augean Stables. Anybody know what the Augean Stables were? No? Hercules? Yes, that's right. The what? The
8th Labour.
Oh, I thought it was the 5th Labour. All right, okay. No, let's split hairs over it. One of the labours of Hercules, he had to clean out the Augean stables, which had housed 30,000 cattle for 30 years and never been cleaned. So yes, exactly. You can imagine, can't you? That's a lot of, well, yeah. So, how did he do it? Do you remember? He diverted a river, that's right, that washed through the stables and cleaned it all out, and thus gave us the greatest invention known to humankind, the flush toilet. Where would we be without that? See, we have lived into a golden age, haven't we? So anyway, here's Death or Liberty, but a new version of it, same tune, different words. Proud bishops we will now translate among priest-crafted martyrs. The guillotine on piers awaits, and knights will hang in garters. Yeah, hang the bastards! Now once for all, the work begun. We'll clean the Augean stables. A moment lost, we are undone. Come strike whilst we are able. Each patriot Briton's song should be, oh give me death or liberty, oh give me death or liberty, oh give me death, sing it, liberty, oh give me death or 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 liberty. Thank you. And that's the version of the song James Ings would have known. So when he came roaring out onto the scaffold and sang it, you can imagine now, because you've sung it yourself, what it would have sounded like in his horrible, anguished, terrified voice. I won't do it. You can hear it in your own. Hear it in your mind's ear. So he goes over, has the noose put round his neck, sings death or liberty once more, and Thistlewood says something to Tid. Tid says, "Don't, Ings. We can die without making a noise." Complete hush. All those thousands of people, all the men with their hats off, looking up, waiting for the moment. And nobody made a sound except somebody who shouted out, "Bring out Edwards!" Edwards! George Edwards, you remember George Edwards? The man who started it all, who paid for all the weapons and the food, who paid their rent, who looked after them, who radicalized them. Why wasn't he up there with them? I mean, can you guess?
Bribe someone.
Hmm?
Bribe someone.
No, he was working for the government. He was working for the Home Secretary, Lord Sidmouth. Sidmouth was the real designer of the Cato Street plot. He planned the whole thing. He provided the money. There was no German Baron uncle. What a ridiculous story. Of course there wasn't. There was the piece of the paper about the dinner by El Harabi was placed by the government. There was no dinner. There was never going to be a dinner. They just wanted to get Thistlewood because he was a nuisance and make an example of a few others. And maybe, I don't know, they worked, these idiots, they would draw right into the trap, the fools. So just let that thing sink for a while. It was all an insider job. Bang! Down goes the trapdoor. And let's see how they die. If you're standing in the crowd, you could have counted them off on the fingers of one hand. 5 men. Thistlewood struggled slightly for a few minutes, but each effort was more faint than the last. And the body soon turned around slowly as if upon the motion of the hand of death. Tid, whose size gave cause to suppose that he would pass with little comparative pain, scarcely moved after the fall. So he's right, wasn't he, about the knot? Davidson, after 3 or 4 heaves, became motionless. The struggles of Ings were great. The assistants of the executioner pulled his legs with all their might. And even then, the reluctance of the soul to part from its native seat was to be observed in the vehement efforts of every part of his body. Brunt suffered extremely. They were left there for half an hour, just to make sure they were really dead. And eventually, after half an hour, the last part of the punishment was enacted. Up came a man in a black leather mask over his face with a hat and a knife about that long, the surgeon. And it was his job to do the beheading. And he was treated by the crowd like a panto villain. They all boo as soon as he came, which apparently made them startled, but he had a job to do, didn't he? So they get Thistlewood first, they bring up the trapdoor, so they're all sitting upright. Cuts him off, cuts the rope, and they pull him over to the coffin lying here, lay him down with his head over the edge, with a block about like that, a block shaped like a wedge. And they put his head, if you actually let your head but just sit back like that, you can feel how heavy it is, you see, it's very heavy. And that actually puts your neck in exactly the right position for the knife, you see. So he started to cut through the windpipe, you see, and through the larynx and down through the difficult job. It took quite a while to do it, but eventually he managed to get all the way through with this knife, picked up the head, which, of course, was hideous. The face was empurpled and full of all the agony of the final throes of death, fully displayed there on the face. Handed it to the assistant executioner, took the head. This is the head of the traitor, Arthur Thistlewood. This is the head of the traitor, Arthur Thistlewood. This is the head of the traitor, Arthur Thistlewood. And the crowd went berserk. Ah, they never seen anything like it. They screamed and they groaned and they cried, and the women were fainting and the children screaming. And it was, they'd never seen anything so hideous in all their lives. But they had to go through it. The next one, Tidd. Here we go. Let's get him over there. You see, William Tidd. Apparently, somebody told me this recently. That I don't know where he found this information. Apparently, when he was cutting through the next head, the knife, actually, the blade broke. And they had to go to the governor of Newgate and use his carving knife that he used on a Sunday to cut the roasts with. That's what they did the rest of the beheading with. So take it off. This is the head. He was bald, so they had to hold it at the side. This is the head of the traitor, William Tidd. This is the head of the traitor, William Tidd. This is the head of the traitor, William Tidd. And then the next one, and the next one, until the last one. And this is where we come back to Thackeray and his account of going to see a man hanged. And the story he tells about something odd that happened in the crowd. Because you see, each time they held up a head, the reaction diminished. The first time it was horror, and then it was less, and then less and less, and then the last one, Ings, there's so much blood and gore all over the place that he picked it up the head and dropped it. And someone in the crowd shouted out, "Butterfingers!" And soon the whole crowd was shouting it and laughing their heads off. Butterfingers! And that was what shocked Thackeray, you see. How quickly the horror diminished, how quickly people got used to it, and how very quickly, as he says, the punishment became a joke. Now, I think that was what horrified me most about it as well, because, I don't know, I suppose they brought it back. We're going into this new era now, aren't we? All of us know this, we're going beyond, we don't know what lies beyond October. They might have a referendum. You know how well those go, don't you? Bring it back. It only takes a couple of terrorist atrocities, like in Birmingham when I was a kid, and I remember this very well, going to see Spike Milligan at the Alexandra Theatre on November the 22nd, 1974, when I was 12, the night after the Birmingham pub bombings. And it was mentioned, Spike Milligan was on stage, and he said, "Thank you very much, everybody, for coming out tonight." And he mentioned that they'd heard it on stage, because the first one went on at 8:15. And the streets of Birmingham were full of people going, "Irish out! Irish out!" and "Bring back hanging! Bring back hanging!" And my God, if they'd had hanging, they would have hanged those guys. Just as well they didn't, because they were the wrong men, weren't they? The Birmingham Six who were in prison for 18 years for something they didn't even do. It's always horrifying. So that's really what this show is about. It's a warning, maybe, about anger. Everyone's so angry and focused on their rage at the moment. It's dangerous. And I think all we can do really is be responsible for the world that we want to bring in, that we want to see ahead of us. Not let them take over and do it their way, but do it the way we wish. See the world we wish to have. And I'm going to leave you with a message of hope from 1795. The last verse of the radical songbook of Give Me Death or Liberty changes suddenly in tone. All the rage and anger and fighting is gone. And in the final verse of the golden age will then revive. Each man will be a brother. In harmony we all shall live and share this earth together. Enlightened youth will love his fellow creature, and future years will prove his truth, that man is good by nature. Then let us drink with 3 times 3 the rain of peace and liberty, the rain of peace and liberty, the rain of peace and liberty, the reign of peace and liberty. The reign of peace and liberty.